The auctioneer had to ask 3 times. 62 acres in central Illinois, offered at the Marin County delinquent tax sale on a Tuesday morning in March, and the room would not bid. Not at $500, not at $3. The auctioneer dropped it to $200, a number so low it was almost an apology, and 40 grown men looked at their shoes, and a 24-year-old woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. There was a sound in that room when she did it. Not quite a laugh, something worse. The sound a room makes when it decides somebody is about to learn something. A man named Del Aubrey turned around in his seat, looked at her, and said loud enough for the whole room, "You know what's on that, honey?" Josie Vance said yes. She knew exactly what was on it. She was wrong. She had no idea, because 11 years later, that 62 acres would be under contract for more money per year than every other acre she owned put together, and she would never harvest a single bushel off it, not one, ever. She would be paid, every single year, specifically and contractually, to make sure nothing on it ever grew tall enough to matter. And the thing that made it worth that money was the exact thing she hated most about it. She had been standing in it, being annoyed by it, for 2 years. Josie Vance was 24 years old, and she was working 2 jobs, and one of them was killing her. Her father died in the fall of 2012. Aneurysm, at the kitchen table, 49 years old. He left her 80 acres of good black central Illinois ground, a 1994 combine, and a mortgage. 80 acres does not support a person. That is the arithmetic nobody puts on a postcard. 80 acres of corn and beans in central Illinois, in a decent year, after inputs and the note and the insurance, might clear you $11,000. In a bad year, it clears you nothing, and takes a bite besides. So Josie farmed 80 acres in the daylight, and worked the 11 to 7 shift at a distribution center off the interstate, scanning freight into a handheld, 40 minutes each way. She had done it for 2 years. She was starting to make mistakes in the field. She had fallen asleep at a stop sign in November and woken up when somebody honked. She needed more acres. That was the whole plan. More acres meant she could quit the night shift. And more acres in central Illinois cost $8,000 each, which meant more acres were not going to happen, unless somebody was selling 62 of them for $200. They called it the Griddle. 62 acres a mile and a half south of her home place, and everybody in that township knew about it, the way you know about a relative who does not come to things. It was flat, not gently rolling like the ground around it. Flat like a table. Flat like a poured slab. Because 10,000 years ago, a glacier had parked there, and dumped a plain of sand and gravel, and then left. And that is the whole problem in one sentence. Under about 9 inches of thin sandy topsoil, the griddle is gravel. All the way down. Corn roots go down 5 feet in good ground. On the griddle they go down 9 inches and hit a wall. So it grows beautifully in May. It grows beautifully in June. And then in the 3rd week of July, when the rain quits the way it always quits in Illinois, that thin soil gives up its water in about 4 days, and the crop cooks standing up. Locals said you could hear it. The griddle had been bought and abandoned 4 times since 1946. Every 20 years, somebody new looked at 62 flat, clean, tillable acres and thought everyone before them had simply done it wrong. Every one of them found out. By 2015, nobody had planted it in a decade. The taxes had gone unpaid for 3 years. There were no trees on it, no buildings on it, no fence worth the word. Just 62 acres of tough, short native grass that nothing had ever managed to kill, because nothing had ever managed to grow. That is what Josie Vance bought for $200. And she bought it knowing all of that, which is the part people always get wrong about this story. She was not naive. She had walked it. She had dug a hole with a spade and hit gravel at 9 inches, and knew exactly what she was looking at. Her thinking was simple. And it was not stupid. 62 acres, at $200 total, is $3 an acre. Even if it only made a crop 1 year in 4, even if she only ever cut rough hay off it, at $3 an acre, it could not lose. So in the spring of 2016, she put it in soybeans. She spent $4,100 she did not have on seed and chemical and fuel. And the griddle came up thick and green and gorgeous. And on the 11th of July, the rain stopped. By the 6th of August, it was brown. She combined it anyway, because leaving it felt like admitting something. 11 bushels an acre. It did not cover the seed. Josie Vance stood at the end of that field in August of 2016, with the combine running behind her, 25 years old, having just lost $4,000 she borrowed, and understood that 40 men in a room in March had been right and she had been wrong. And then a plane came over. It came from the north, low and enormous, a cargo freighter on final approach with its gear already down, and it passed over the griddle at maybe 400 feet, with a noise you feel in your sternum before you hear it. Josie did not even look up. She had stopped looking up 2 years earlier. Because that was the other thing about the griddle. The thing so obvious nobody bothered to say it out loud. It sat directly under the approach path of Marin County Regional, 1 mile off the end of runway 32, and roughly 40 times a day, something came over it low enough to read. That was one more strike against the field. It was why nobody would ever build a house there. It was why the ground had no residential value to fall back on. It was, in the mental ledger every farmer in that county kept, simply one more reason the griddle was junk. Josie Vance stood in a dead soybean field and let a cargo plane go over her head and did not think about it for 18 more months. Now, before I tell you what came in the mail in the winter of 2018, do me one favor. Hit subscribe. I put a new story up every single day, and this is the exact point where the worst decision she ever made starts turning into the best one. Because the envelope that came was an offer, and she almost signed it. Marin County Regional got a cargo contract in 2017. A logistics company put a regional sorting facility on the north side, and the airport went from a sleepy field with a flight school and a few commuter runs to something that mattered. And in 2018, they announced a runway extension and a land acquisition program. In February of 2019, Josie Vance got a letter. Marin County Airport Authority offered to purchase her 62 acres outright for $1,100 an acre, $68,200. Now understand what that is. Good ground around her was selling at $8,000 an acre. They were offering her $1,100, and the letter explained why, in a polite paragraph. The parcel had no demonstrated agricultural productivity. They were pricing her land at its worthlessness. They were using the very thing that had humiliated her as the reason to pay her less. And she was going to take it. Of course she was going to take it. $68,000 for a field she paid $200 for. That is the night shift gone. That is the note on the home place cut in half. That is a person's whole life turning over on a single signature. She had the pen in her hand, and she stopped because of a phrase in the second paragraph. The letter said the parcel was required for approach protection and wildlife hazard mitigation. Josie Vance did not know what that meant. Not really. And she was tired enough, and stubborn enough, and had been condescended to enough in the last 3 years, that not knowing what a sentence meant in a document somebody wanted her to sign made her put the pen down. She drove to the county library the next morning and typed that phrase into a search bar. Here is what she found. And all of it, every word of it, was public. It had been public the entire time. An airport is not allowed to just have land near a runway. It is required to control what happens on it, and the rules are written down in federal advisory circulars anybody can read. 2 things matter. and the griddle satisfied both by accident. The first is the approach surface. There is an invisible sloping plane extending out from the end of every runway, and nothing is permitted to poke up through it. Not buildings, not towers, not trees. On a parcel a mile off the end of a runway, that ceiling is low, and a mature stand of corn is 14 feet of solid vegetation. The second is wildlife, and the second one is the whole story. Birds bring down aircraft. That is not a small or theoretical risk. It is the thing airport operations people lose sleep over. So the FAA requires airports to actively manage the land around them to make it as unattractive to birds as possible. What attracts birds? Grain, standing water. Waterfowl come to ponds and wet fields. Blackbirds and starlings come by the tens of thousands to corn and soybean stubble. A harvested grain field beside a runway is, to a flock, a buffet with a landing strip attached. So an airport in the middle of Illinois has a genuine problem, and it is this. It is surrounded on every side by hundreds of thousands of acres of exactly the thing it is legally required not to have next to it. Now go back and read the Griddle's obituary again. Dead flat, so nothing interrupts the approach surface. 9 inches of soil over gravel, so it cannot grow a tall crop even if you tried. So droughty it will not hold standing water for 2 days. So no waterfowl, no grain, ever, because grain does not make it to August out there. No trees, no buildings, nothing for anything to perch on. Covered already in a tough, short native sod that has survived 80 years of neglect, without irrigation, fertilizer, or attention. Every single reason that field was worthless was a reason it was perfect. Josie Vance sat in the Marin County Public Library and read that list twice and started to laugh, and then had to go outside. If that just landed on you, the way it landed on her, tell me in the comments, has something in your life ever turned out to be valuable for the exact reason everybody said it was junk? I read every one of these, and some of them turn into the next story on this channel. Because Josie was about to figure out the part that actually made her money, and it was not the land. She went back to the library, and she read the airport's own master plan. Airport master plans are public documents. They are filed, they are published, they are sitting on a shelf and on a website, and essentially nobody who is not paid to read them ever does. That plan named her parcel. It described the wildlife hazard management program the airport was required to implement, and it laid out, in a table, the funding, a federal grant, matched locally, with the mitigation measures required to be in place by a date. There was a deadline, in writing, public, and here is the thing Josie Vance understood in that library, that the airport authority had not thought about carefully enough. They did not need to own her land. They needed her land to stay a certain way, forever, mowed to a height. Never planted in grain, never allowed to hold water, monitored, documented, reported. That is not a purchase, that is a service, performed continuously. For as long as the airport exists, they had offered her $68,000, one time, to buy a problem. What they actually needed was somebody to solve it every year. She wrote back and declined the offer, and she proposed, instead, a long-term management agreement. She would retain the ground and maintain all 62 acres to their published specification, under contract, for an annual fee. The airport authorities' response took 9 days, and it was not friendly. They pointed out that airports possess the power of eminent domain for legitimate aeronautical purposes. They said it plainly enough that a 28-year-old woman, reading it alone at her kitchen table, would understand she was being told to be reasonable. And Josie Vance, who had read the master plan, already knew the one thing that made that threat hollow. She had looked up how long a condemnation takes in Illinois. Appraisal, negotiation, filing, quick-take proceedings, valuation hearings. It is a process measured in many months, and frequently in years. She counted the months to their grant deadline. There were not enough of them. The airport authority could absolutely take her land. They simply could not take it in time. And if the mitigation was not in place when the federal money said it had to be, the problem was not Josie Vance's. She wrote one more letter. It was polite. It restated her proposal. And it mentioned, in a single sentence, that she understood the compliance schedule in the published master plan and remained ready to sign immediately. They signed in 6 weeks. If your jaw just came unhinged, comment the deadline and let me know. That is the exact moment this stopped being a story about a bad field. Now stay with me, because what she did next is bigger than the field. The first contract was for 62 acres, and it paid her, that year, more than the entire offer would have. Spread across a term, indexed, with the mowing and monitoring costs on her side and a margin on top. But Josie Vance had read the same master plan the airport had, and she knew something else. 62 acres was not enough. The approach corridor ran for 1.5 miles, and it ran across 7 other people's ground. Every one of those parcels was in corn and beans. Every one of them was, from the airport side of the fence, a hazard. So she went to see her neighbors. She was not buying their land. She was offering to lease their worst corners, the wet spots, the odd triangles, the ends that never paid, and manage them to the airport's spec, and pay them more per acre than those corners had ever made in row crop. 6 of the 7 said yes inside a year. The 7th was Del Aubrey, the man who had turned around in his seat in March of 2015 and asked her if she knew what was on that field. He held out 2 years. Then he came to her. She gave him the same rate she gave everybody else. She never mentioned the auction. Several people who know her say the fact that she never mentioned it is the most Josie Vance thing about the entire story. By 2023, she was managing 410 acres of approach corridor under contract. By 2025, she had a second airport in an adjacent county, a truck, 3 employees, and a business that had nothing whatsoever to do with weather, commodity prices, export markets, or rain in the 3rd week of July. She quit the night shift on the 9th of October, 2019. She has said, in the years since, that she does not remember the last freight she scanned, but she remembers the drive home, and that she pulled over on the county road by the Griddle and sat there until the sun came up. There is a letter in a drawer in Josie Vance's kitchen. It is 1 page. It is dated February 2019. It offers her $68,200 for 62 acres of ground that had beaten 4 owners in 80 years, and it explains, in a courteous paragraph, that the price reflects the parcel's lack of demonstrated agricultural productivity. There is no signature on it. She came within a pen stroke of taking it, and she has never once pretended otherwise. She says the only reason she did not is that she did not know what a phrase in the second paragraph meant, and she was too tired that particular week to sign something she did not understand. That is the whole margin. That is the entire difference between this story and a story nobody would ever tell. Here is what I want you to take from this. Nobody lied to Josie Vance. The Griddle really is bad farmland. Every man in that auction room in 2015 was correct. It will not grow corn. It never has, and it never will. They were not wrong about the land. They were just all answering the same question, the only question anybody in that county had ever thought to ask about dirt. How many bushels? And by that measure, the Griddle scored a 0, and had scored a 0 for 80 years, and everybody agreed, and the agreement was so complete that the field had a nickname. But there was a second exam. It had been written down years earlier, in a federal advisory circular and a public master plan sitting in a county library. And on that exam, the Griddle scored higher than any other parcel in the township. Precisely, item by item, because of every single thing that made it fail the first one. So go look at the thing on your place that everybody agrees is worthless. And before you take the first offer somebody makes you for it, find out what test they are grading it on. Because somebody is offering to buy it, and people do not make offers on worthless things. So tell me down in the comments, what is the piece of your place that everybody calls junk? I read every single one, and some of them become the next story on this channel. And if you made it this far, you already know what to do. Subscribe. There is a new one every day. Tomorrow's is about a man who bought 90 acres of poisoned ground for $1,400 and grew something on it that sold for $60 an ounce. You are going to want to be here for that one.